Watts Wetland is a 700-acre wet prairie located in Franklin County, Ohio. It is a part of Battelle-Darby Creek Metro Park and falls within the Big Darby Creek watershed. The land was purchased between 2003 and 2004 from Darby Dan Farms for use by the park system. It was used as agricultural land for about 150 years before restoration efforts began in 2010. The site now contains native prairie grasses, wildflowers, pools, and walking trails. When determining what type of ecosystem the site would be restored to, the restoration team looked at current site information including hydrology, soil type, and topography. The team also referred to 1800s plat maps of the area, nearby remnants of Darby Plains prairies and cemeteries along railroad tracks and in other preserves, and sites with similar conditions throughout Battelle-Darby Creek Metro Park. Based on the historic map information and the proximity to nearby prairie ecosystems, they determined the restoration site was a prairie before cultivation. Pooling water within the field, despite drainage tiles, and the presence of very poorly draining kokomo soils suggested a possible wetland habitat. All this information was used to decide on restoring the site to a wet prairie ecosystem. The project began with the restoration of wetland hydrology by removing the agricultural subsurface drainage network and creating earthen berms to protect neighboring properties and provide a spillway into Big Darby Creek in case of overflows. Shallow pools were also dug to encourage surface water features. Once construction of the terrain was finished, seeding efforts began. The seed used for the project was all locally sourced native seed from surrounding Darby Plains remnants. We had the opportunity to talk with Carrie Morrow and Andrew Boos, who were both involved in the project from the beginning and provided great insight into the seed acquisition and seeding process.
All the seed, as you see here, was collected at Metro Parks. It was collected here at Battelle-Darby Creek Metro Park. All started in the late 70s. Jack McDowell, who started the prairie restoration, started with a handful of seed, and within that handful of seed over years we were able to create this completely with Darby Plains seed, all of it with Darby Plains seed. It was a multiple people collecting seed, volunteers collecting seed, and being part of the department of pick it up and put it back down. We picked it up, put it back in the drills, and put it right back down, sometimes less than a mile from where we picked it, sometimes less than 100 feet from where we picked it, to create this. And my main job out here after all the harvesting was done was to sit on a tractor with a drill that was about 12 feet wide and drive back and forth along with Jack McDowell in this field for weeks on end. I think what you see here.
The Darby Plains region is about 385 square miles west of Columbus, and Prairie Oaks and Battelle-Darby Creek Metro Parks both fall in that zone. So any of the prairies that we restore in those two parks, we're going to use the seed that we've collected and we've cleaned, and we seed. We hand collected, we mechanically collected, and so we've propagated and expanded the Darby Plains prairie through this whole process, and this gave us an opportunity to do it at such a large scale. I mean, we started, with just acres of restored prairie, and then you can say 700 acres of restored Darby Plains prairie.
The greatest ecological restoration challenge faced by this site is damage to the prairie ecosystem caused by invasive plant species. During our interview, Carrie took some time to discuss some of the most problematic species.
A lot of it have been, just a handful of invasive species. I'll name the big ones: Calorie pear, Phragmites australis, which is the giant reed grass. We may have struggled a little bit with some purple loosestrife, Canada thistle, teasel, some of those herbs that are invasive. But for the most part, the prairie does a good job of once it's established, keeping other invaders out. But unfortunately, Calorie pear and Phragmites are so aggressive and so prolific that they're really hard to control.
This ecological challenge is also a social one, because surrounding housing developments and cities continue to use invasive species like calorie pear as ornamental landscape plants. This creates a regular source of new invasive plants that can continue to colonize the site after initial removal efforts. But the implementation of invasive species blacklist regulations in Ohio, like the 2018 ban on Phragmites and 37 other invasive species, may help reduce the continued planting of these species in areas surrounding the park. They won't get rid of the plants already in the neighborhoods and ecosystems. A 2016 study by Miralander et al. Found a potential link between increased environmental knowledge through engagement in hands-on environmental projects and increased pro-environmental behavior. Based on this potential link involving the surrounding community and invasive species removals may convince them to remove invasive species from their own properties and help reduce their future colonization of the restoration site. While it can be easy to give into the Commander-in-Chief restoration myth and attempt to control all aspects of our restoration site, sometimes the best way to overcome complex problems is to respect the dynamic nature of the system and allow natural processes to occur in an ecologically justifiable way. Sometimes our management goals are met just by watching closely and letting nature take its course. Andrew described an example of this in relation to the formation of the site's open water pools.
All this open water out here was a major problem at one point because we couldn't keep it open. It was full of cattails, and we brought out various machinery. We attempted to spray it to try to keep some open water, to keep an open water habitat. Not that cattails are all bad, but all cattails aren't good. And lo and behold, one of the animals that causes us problems in dams by burrowing into it also loves to chew down cattails. And most of this open water, if not all of it, is to the benefit of free labor from a muskrat. So sometimes the challenges you have to work out, okay, the muskrats dig into the burrows, not good, but the muskrats do this and the birders love this. So you got to find that balance.
Our long-term restoration goals for this site are to create a resilient wet prairie ecosystem composed of native Ohio prairie plant species, provide nesting habitat for sandhill cranes and grassland birds, and design a recreational environment that teaches the public about native Ohio prairie ecosystems and their importance to wildlife. We want to create an ecosystem that is able to teach the public and allow them to interact with nature while at the same time making sure that the habitats of the native plants and animals are not disturbed. Our first medium-term goal is to reduce the annual abundance of invasive plant species by at least 75% over the next 10 years. The invasives we will be targeting include Phragmites, Callery pear, and narrow-leaf cattails. Our next goal is to increase annual visits to Watts Wetland by 25% in order to teach more people about the prairie ecosystem and its importance. Our last goal is to have 33% of the land designated as nesting habitat for the sandhill cranes and grassland birds, making sure the public can see these areas to learn about the nesting habits of the birds but not access them in order to reduce any disturbances. Our short-term goals include conducting controlled burns on half of the site every 3 to 4 years to reduce invasive species abundances and grass heights, alternating which half of the site is being burned each time. This 3 to 4 year interval allows time for native prairie species to become established and outcompete other species in the area, and switching halves is important to allow prairie insects to survive their early life stage cycles. Scram 1990. The burning will be done in the early spring months in order to create optimal growth conditions. We also want to create 0.5 miles of boardwalks over wetland areas each year for 5 years to increase visitor access to pools while reducing visitor impact to the ecosystem, making sure to avoid the designated nesting areas for sandhill cranes and grassland birds. Another goal is to increase wetland-related education signage in order to provide visitors with more information about the prairie. In order to reduce the abundance of invasives, we will have yearly herbicide treatments done in the summer months to eliminate any invasive found, being careful to avoid native plants. Lastly, we will conduct yearly soil and water quality checks to ensure that optimal conditions are being kept to best allow for native plants and wildlife to thrive. For our reference information, we will use same place, different time and look at data from what the land was like before being turned into farmland. We will use this to help determine what native plants thrive in the area and whether the invasives now were also a problem before, which can be useful when determining how to treat the invasives. We will also use different place, same time and look at other prairies that use controlled fire as a restoration method to determine how often and when to burn in order to produce the best results.
An adaptive management approach is an important strategy in all restoration challenges. Utilizing adaptive management allows the restoration managers to adjust to unforeseen circumstances and confounding variables. Before the project, the team used adaptive management strategies by extensively researching the site prior to making the decision to turn it into a wet prairie. It is also being used by setting SMART goals, outlining specific actions such as the yearly prescribed burns, and monitoring the site using plant and bird surveys. Stakeholders are being involved in the project with the addition of the boardwalks to the wetland area. If the actions taken by the team were found to be ineffective in all or part of the site, they would have the correct tools and preparation to respond in a quick and ecologically justified way.